Yes, we're being recorded, so welcome. Great. Welcome everybody who's on our Cyberside chat tonight. And to those of you on the recording, thanks for calling in. I live for this kind of thing. This was a trip I've been wanting to take forever with Oxfam. I don't get to do enough of this. I'm sure you feel the same way. You love to go out and see what's actually going on. So we got to learn what it's like for a new settlement on the northern outskirts of Lima and their struggle to maintain access to fresh water. And the BBC covered it in this story that I've shown here, saying, is this a glimpse of our future? Lima is the world's second largest city that's in a desert. You would never know it if you're in Lima, but when you leave it, this is what you see. People came 15 years ago to establish a new life in this and this. And now it looks like this. 15 years later, they have houses and dwellings, and there's buses that shuttle commuters back and forth every day. We got a chance to speak with the leader from the community's water board, Gisela, recorded here for the BBC. And she spoke to us about actually her pride that they've been able to do as much as they have in the 15 years that she's lived there. People fled to the city, like in so many countries. They were fleeing economic disaster in the countryside, hyperinflation, and also terrorism that was plaguing the rural people far worse than it was those in the capital. Just to get a feel for what it's like to live in a place like this, the plants were covered in dust. Everything was covered in dust and sand. A gringo selfie, but I'm showing it because the guys that I'm with here were going off to play soccer. I said, well, where do you play soccer in a place like this? Their soccer field is concrete, no grass. And I said, what is that like if you're diving to stop a goal or you're diving to make a goal? I mean, can you imagine the scabs on their knees? But they're going to play soccer on concrete. And another thing, the community wanted to show us how they are able to plug a hose up to their source of water and then fill up the canisters outside of people's homes to get water. And what I thought spoke volumes was this dog. It basically sniffed the water as soon as there were drops, and then it hung around while all of this was going on until it got a chance to sneak a drink. And the people shooed it away and said, go away, but it hung around and it eventually got its drink. And it's just insights into the life in a place like this. Old, an elderly woman and her very young, presumably granddaughter, came with a giant pot, and the two of them just lugging it down the road was another picture I got. Just the lengths that people need to go to. Briefly, part of the solution has been through community development. Oxfam's provided some assistance, some technical assistance. There's a great organization that's called Alternativa that has really led this effort to build 17 reservoirs like the one you see on the left, a tank. And then Gisela and other people in the community are doing women's banking and loans, and they're providing micro loans to families, women and men, to purchase the tank you see on the right, which is a much more sanitary way to go than the kind of buckets and canisters that you see many people are using. So if they can get a really good term on a micro loan to buy one of these tanks and then pipe the water from that into their home, and they can actually wash their hands at the sink and have a shower with dignity, as in the words of Gisela. The thing of it all, the kicker, and I encourage you to read the BBC story, is they have to pay. They're paying through the nose. They're paying, maybe a third or more of their income to just get water. And the injustice is that the community that's got the worst services and the least sanitary and the least secure water is the one that's paying the most. And that's the people who have to wait for the truck to drive through with the big hose on the back. And the people go running out into the street with their canisters and their buckets, and they pay the guy with the truck, and he just unloads a bunch of water into their buckets, and those are the people who are paying like 3 or 4 times more than those who have, by this point, established better connections to the city's grid. So I'm going to now just give you a slideshow without story, just to let you know the kind of thing that Oxfam was doing and that you are supporting. We gathered indigenous women from 7 different countries for the People's Summit. They wanted to do this, an offering. They called it a mística or una ofrenda, map of Latin America with an offering of seeds, flowers, foods, candles to the gods. And we basically all took part. And there's me, the gringo in the middle there. I was invited to join. I wouldn't have barged in otherwise, but they said, "Come help us." And calling the demanding, title to land for women, that Congress approves laws for family agriculture, investment support for family agriculture, and then they had a workshop in which they presented the demands that have arisen from several workshops held around the continent this year, and they've produced a report. And they submitted that report to government minister from Peru as well as the ambassador from Nicaragua to then take that into the COP20. And they were relating to food sovereignty and food security and resilience to climate change and so forth. On Human Rights Day, we had a march. The Oxfam contingent was there. Oxfam's international director, the head of all of the Oxfams, basically, is Winnie in the foreground here. Winnie Byanyima from Uganda, and to her right in the hat in the sunglasses is my mom, who marched like a champ, and then to her left with the trombone is the country director for Oxfam Peru, Pancho, who also is in this amazing band. And I love this sign: to drink water gives you life, but to take conscience gives us all water. And Oxfam Peru is just beginning to work with volunteers. They did a street exhibit. They were doing things that you would all recognize having done yourselves, reaching out to members of the public, getting them engaged. The whole idea was that water is crucial, not just for us to drink, but for the production of food and clothing. And then they had a presentation, and everybody pledged to conserve water. The brown slash in the middle it's a map of Peru, this whole colored graphic. But in the middle, the darker brown, that is the highlands. Peru has a mountain range running through it. And to the left of the mountain range is effectively coastal, humid desert. And to the right of it is the Amazon. And the glaciers along that tropical mountain range are critical sources of fresh water. As they melt, the water runs down and fills the river system that feeds the Amazon River to the east and provides fresh water to the cities such as Lima to the west. And the graphic basically shows what everyone in Peru is talking about. I found everybody was talking about the glacial melt, that due to climate change, an alarming recession of the glaciers, meaning less secure water sources for future generations. Here's a picture I snapped through the clouds. You can see a glacier peeking through there on a mountain, and just my layman's observation, it's understandable how those mountains would obtain godlike qualities, especially when you see that glacier peeking through like that, as if directly down from heaven. You can't overstate how important the mountains are in Peruvian culture and history. And here's another look at the landscape. Obviously not the tallest mountains. There's no snow-capped mountains here, but you have highlands that are dry. You have plains for agriculture and so forth. It's absolutely breathtakingly beautiful country, and the history, like so much of Latin America, is one in which the Europeans came. Well, America actually, North America included. The Europeans came and basically just stuck their flagpole in the ground and said, "This is ours now. Sucks for you." And so while it's absolutely beautiful, this sort of fusion. Anyone who's been to Latin America, the European, the colonial, the native, the indigenous elements, the so forth. But it's shocking, really, when you look at the graphic on the right. You have Inca architecture, which is the big stones and the windows, the niches in that stone carving, and literally the Spaniards just came in and said, "Oh, this is your sun temple. This is like your most important temple to the sun god. Good. We're going to build our church on top of yours." And this graphic just shows how literally the Spanish style arch was built on top of the Inca stone, and that speaks volumes. It's like a metaphor for just what has become a cultural fusion in Peru, and I think there's a lot of pride. Peru has a lot to be proud of. How through the generations these cultures have mixed and created a unique fusion that is Peru, and it's shown in its cooking. Peru is becoming almost like the France of South America. Its cooking is renowned. Its chefs are renowned. So just in closing, Peru, I think, has a story for all of us going forward in the future. The Inca people were incredible innovators, and they built terraces like this to experiment with agriculture and to grow crops. Peru is the source of great biodiversity in corn, 3,000 varieties of potatoes. We can thank the Andes and this culture for things like quinoa, tomatoes, potatoes, corn. So many of our staples can be traced back to cultivation by the amazing engineers and innovators of the Inca people in the Andes. They built these incredible, this is Machu Picchu, you probably recognize from photos, an incredibly advanced society. The engineering and the irrigation blew my mind. And the struggle continues. There was effectively a history of land grabbing in all of its dimensions by colonizers, and this is continuing to this day with land grabs by mining companies, lumber companies. Oxfam helped do an action at the COP20 demanding justice for the assassination just in September of 4 indigenous leaders who were confronting an illegal lumber operation in their land. Their widows came to COP20. We did an action inside the venue and got immediate response from Peruvian government, who had previously been ignoring their appeal, and they made some specific commitments to provide some measure of justice to this community. But the struggle continues to this day. Indigenous, rural communities, farmers, small farmers, we need to cultivate, we need to invest, we need that continued innovation in agriculture at the small scale, that biodiversity that they protect. We have to march together with them. We are currently, everything that you're doing, Oxfam Action Corps, the awareness raising, the petitions, the events, is all tied into this struggle, which is today's continuation of the injustices of the past. We have to confront the injustices of the present. And of course, who doesn't want to have a photo of a chinchilla? These guys are, this one is from Machu Picchu, and he let me get real close. But, I just had to get that in.